So, whatever happened to not only my personal favorite movie of all time, but probably and possibly the most influential science fiction film ever made from the 1970s on, the original, non-special edition 1977 Star Wars? Let's find out. Movies, music, and monsters. Hey guys, Dan Monroe here, talking about movies, music, and monsters. Oh boy, Star Wars! No, not A New Hope, just Star Wars, and yes, I know what you're thinking. There's already 100 million other videos out there already about the original Star Wars, and that's probably why I never did talk about this film in depth, even though, like I said, it is my personal favorite film of all time, but then I got to thinking, well, why the heck not? Maybe, just maybe, mind you, I might be able to offer some information that quite possibly someone out there doesn't know, or maybe I just kind of feel like talking about my favorite childhood film. Either way, I decided to give it a shot, my take, my thoughts, honestly, to maybe offer some really in-depth information that you probably wouldn't get by watching your typical making of Star Wars special, and hopefully you'll sit back and enjoy the trip with me through intergalactic hyperspace. So, grab your lightsaber, your Dianoga monster, and your favorite cantina creature of choice, and let's dive in. Super huge thanks once again to James Small for providing a ton of great information. Check out his amazing website at smallartworks.ca for excellence in model building. Well, it's about time. Star Wars. Yes, Star Wars 1977. I am both thrilled and yet slightly embarrassed to say that the first time I saw this film was in a small town in western New York at a drive-in theater called the Transit Drive-In. I remember hearing rumblings about this movie. It had probably been out for, I don't know, a couple of months by this time, but everybody in school was talking about it, and I begged my father to grab the old station wagon, toss me in the back, and head out to the drive-in theater so I could see what all the fuss was about. And he did, and we did, and there I was, back in the summer of 1977, hanging out of the back of our Vista Cruiser station wagon with the metal drive-in speaker securely fastened to the window in glorious, horrible monophonic sound. As the film began, the credits rolled, I witnessed the attack of the Empire on the Rebel blockade runner. I remember seeing the droids escape in the escape pod and land on Tatooine, and then I remember falling asleep. Wait, what? Yeah, I know, my favorite movie in the world, and the first time I saw it, I fell asleep. Something about that doesn't seem quite right. I honestly have no explanation whatsoever. However, that being said, all it did was fuel the fire inside me to learn more about this movie, knowing that I would probably see it again in the near future. My brother, Paul Monroe, the author of one of the very first books ever published on Lost in Space, was also a huge fan. You know, he was collecting some really cool stuff like the models and the calendar, and the bubblegum cards. So, for the next year, I absolutely engulfed myself in everything Star Wars without actually having remembered seeing the film at all the first time around. And it honestly wasn't until almost an entire year later that I really was able to sit down and watch the film during the 1978 re-release that my mind was blown, my childhood was complete, and my life from that point on was forever altered. You mean you like this Star Wars thing more than Lost in Space? I'm waiting. I'm really quite disappointed. Star Wars was an American sci-fi film created by the genius mind of a very young George Lucas, taking place, which I often forget, as a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And it all really started way back in 1971 when George Lucas wanted to film an adaptation of the Flash Gordon series, an idea he had around the time he completed his first film, THX 1138. But the rights to Flash Gordon had already been acquired by producer Dino De Laurentiis, so he began developing his own outer space galactic adventure. Absolutely staggering to think that if George Lucas had gotten the rights to Flash Gordon back in 71, we would never have gotten Star Wars. I mean, sorry, but that really just blows my mind. Anyway, Lucas persuaded the head of United Artists, David Parker, to consider two ideas that he had. One being American Graffiti, and the other being some type of, as he called it, a space opera. Now, even though Mr. Lucas did sign a two-picture deal, United Artists ultimately declined to produce American Graffiti, so Universal Pictures picked it up, and Lucas spent the next 2 years working on that film, which was not only popular but also extremely profitable at the box office. Now, after the release of American Graffiti in January 1973, George Lucas began working on the space opera full-time. He essentially came up with a 2-page synopsis titled Journal of the Whills, which chronicled the tale of C.J. Thorpe, an apprentice Jedi Bendu being trained by the legendary Mace Windu. What the flying heck are you talking about? Well, this is really how it all started. But George felt that this particular story treatment was just a little bit too difficult to understand, so he then began writing a new 13-page treatment called The Star Wars on April 17th, 1973, specifically claiming that his Star Wars story was not a story about the future, but rather a fantasy that has really more in common with traditional fairy tales than 2001: A Space Odyssey. He really wanted young people to be able to experience an honest, wholesome fantasy story and hope it would offer the romance, the adventure, and the fun that used to be in practically every movie and serial that he watched when he was a kid.
If there's anything the Star Wars experience has been for me, it's unpredictable. Not only in the making of the movies and in creating the stories in the first place, which is the fun of it, is because you don't know where it's going to go, and the making of them were a huge adventure. Probably the original impetus for the whole thing was I used to watch a serial on television called Adventure Theater, and they had Flash Gordon, and I used to love that. So I went off and wrote my own space opera, and the script was very ambitious. It told a very large story. When I finished it, I realized that it was way too big to make into a movie. So I took the first part of it, sort of the first act, and I said, I'll make the movie about this. So that's really how the first project came to pass.
Now, even though United Artists was impressed with the innocence of the story and the sophistication of Lucas's fictional world, they turned it down. Wow, I'll bet somebody was kicking themselves in the butt once the summer of 77 arrived. No kidding. So, Lucas and producer Gary Kurtz then presented the treatment to Universal Pictures, the guys that just financed American Graffiti, but again, they turned it down. Enter 20th Century Fox studio president Alan Ladd Jr., without whom we wouldn't even be having this conversation. He didn't understand anything that he was reading. He didn't understand the technical side of the project, and quite frankly, he didn't know whether this was going to be a monumental film or the biggest bomb in Hollywood history. But what he did know was he believed in George Lucas as a person, as a director, and based solely on that, Lucas got a deal with Fox for $150,000 to write and direct the film, and in February 1975, Fox granted the film a budget of $5 million, which was later increased to $8.5 million. That's it? You couldn't make an episode of Family Guy for that these days. Well, that's what they had. So Lucas got started on the final shooting script, and by May 1974, he had expanded the original treatment to a 132-page rough draft, which did include elements such as the Sith, the Death Star, and a general named Anakin Star Killer. And after numerous rewrites, he eventually changed the Star Killer character from a general to an adolescent boy. Originally, Corellian smuggler Han Solo was a large, green-skinned alien monster with gills, but Chewbacca was always there as the co-pilot, an idea he got from watching his own extremely large dog sitting in the passenger seat of his own car. Now, in January 1975, Lucas completed a second draft called Adventures of the Star Killer, Episode 1, The Star Wars, along with a bunch of other key characters and points in the film, and it was in this draft that he introduced a mystical energy field called the Force, the concept of Jedi turning to the dark side, and a historical Jedi who was the first to turn and who subsequently trained the Sith. Now, the third draft, dated August 1st, 1975, was called The Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Starkiller, but then later retitled again in 1976 as, get this, The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as taken from the Journal of the Whills, Saga 1, The Star Wars. Then finally, by the time March 1976 rolled around, the crew started filming, and it was during early production that he changed Luke's name from Star Killer to Skywalker and changed the title finally to simply Star Wars. I'm not going to spend too much time on the cast. Everybody knows who they are, but it was interesting that Lucas made the decision right up front that he wanted to fill the outer space roles with completely unknown actors. Jodie Foster was actually offered the role of Princess Leia, but turned it down because she was under contract with Disney. Mark Hamill was cast as Luke over Robbie Benson, Robert Englund, William Catt, and Kurt Russell. And even though he had worked with Harrison Ford previously on American Graffiti, Ford, while sitting in reading lines to the other actors, just came across to Lucas as, I don't know, just perfect for the part, so Harrison got the role. Han shot first. No one shot first. Han was the only one who shot, period, end of story. Fine, be that way. Lucas did make an exception to the unknown casting decision at the insistence of Gary Kurtz and accepted at least a couple established Hollywood stars in the film, like Sir Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi and Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin. And get this is wild, Alec Guinness negotiated for, on top of his regular salary to appear in the film, a 2.25% of the film's back-end grosses, which literally means that Alec Guinness made more money to this day than any other actor in Star Wars. Anthony Daniels famously took the role of C-3PO after seeing a Ralph McQuarrie concept painting of the character. Kenny Baker and Peter Mayhew were cast as R2-D2 and Chewbacca, largely because of their height, or lack thereof it. David Prowse was originally offered the role of Chewbacca, but turned it down as he wanted to play the villain in the movie, or as they say over there across the pond, the baddie of the film. Fun fact, the Rebel blockade runner as seen in the beginning of the film was originally going to be the Millennium Falcon, Han Solo's ship, until it was brought to Lucas's attention that this particular design looked a little bit too much like the ship from Space 1999, so they just took it and revamped it just a little bit and made it the blockade runner, allowing for the new iconic design of the squished hamburger-style spaceship to be the Millennium Falcon. Super interesting. Originally, the planet of Tatooine was a jungle planet, and Gary Kurtz even traveled over to the Philippines to scout locations, but the thought of spending month after month in the jungle made George Lucas just more than a little bit uncomfortable, to say the least, so bingo. Just like that, Tatooine was a desert planet. So many different techniques were used to save money on this film. Some of them I never really thought about until just now, but the entire film, if you think about it, really only takes place in 3 locations: a desert planet, the Death Star, and the Rebel base at the end. And along the same lines, there are no costume changes. Everybody wears exactly the same thing from the moment you see them at the beginning to the moment the credits roll at the end. Well, I guess for maybe slight alterations during the final award ceremony, but still super cool little tidbits that just kind of make you stop and go, huh. Super fun fact, R2-D2 got his name when Lucas and sound editor Walter Murch were mixing American Graffiti. Walter yelled out, "Hey George, go over to the rack and grab me R2-D2, which actually stood for Reel 2 Dialogue 2. So George wrote it down in his little notebook, and the rest, as they say, is droid history. Now, to say that filming Star Wars was extremely problematic would be quite the understatement. Production fell behind schedule in the very first week of filming due to malfunctioning props and electronic breakdowns. The radio-controlled R2-D2 models barely ever worked. The left leg of Anthony Daniels' C-3PO costume shattered, injuring his foot. Lucas and the British cinematographer Gilbert Taylor clashed constantly about filming and directorial styles, and to top it all off, an extremely rare rainstorm struck the entire country of Tunisia. But eventually, after a very long 2.5 weeks, the production then moved to the beautiful Elstree Studios in London for all of the interior shots. Nothing against the guy, but George Lucas certainly did not have much patience for actors, famously mumbling one of his only directions to any of the actors, which was, "Do it again, faster and more intense." Filming in Britain took 14.5 weeks, with pickup shots taking place in Guatemala for the location of the Rebel base on Yavin 4. Fun fact, originally, the Obi-Wan Kenobi character did not die in the final version of the script, but hilariously, Alec Guinness hated the character's dialogue so much that he literally begged George Lucas to kill him off, which Lucas eventually agreed to, figuring that the character really served no purpose after his fight with Vader at the end of the film anyway. Now, by this time, the studio heads at Fox, along with the board members supplying the escalating budget, were getting more than a little concerned about this George Lucas space movie. With things so behind schedule, Lucas was literally given 1 week to finish the entire production, or the entire movie would be shut down. So, Lucas split the crew up into 3 different units, one led by Lucas, another by Gary Kurtz, and a third by production supervisor Robert Watts, and luckily, in the end, they finally met the studio's deadline, but not until after Lucas became so depressed and defeated that he checked himself into a hospital and was diagnosed with hypertension and exhaustion.
Well, luckily it was all over by that point.
Are you kidding? It's only just getting started. Lucas got all the way back to California and found out that his newly created company, ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, had spent nearly half of their budget and only got 1 shot done that was considered acceptable.
Those sons of blasters.
Star Wars was originally slated for a December 25th, 1976 release, Christmas Day, kind of cool, I guess, but all the production delays pushed it back to mid-1977. The editor, John Jimson, began cutting the film while Lucas was filming in Tunisia, but when Lucas got back, he realized that he absolutely hated what he was seeing, so he got his then-wife, Marcia Lucas, to come in and recut the film, and many people believe, including me, that it was Marcia Lucas's re-edit of Star Wars that actually made the film as tight and exciting as what we finally saw in theaters in May 1977. Also around this time, Lucas cut together a rough cut of the film. None of the special effects were done yet, so he stuck in a bunch of old footage of World War II planes flying around and showed it to a lot of his best friends, and they all hated it. They didn't get it. They didn't understand it. Only one person did, however, and that was Steven Spielberg, who absolutely loved the story and the characters. Now, with the deadline looming, probably the most positive part for George Lucas of making this entire film happened, something that superseded all of his expectations, the magnificent, unbelievable, and super memorable score by genius composer John Williams, really doing something quite revolutionary at the time at Lucas's request to not give the film any kind of a score that dated it to the 1970s, but rather a more classic cinematic orchestral score that would live well beyond its years. And holy Jiminy Christmas, I can certainly say this amazing soundtrack certainly did that, being recorded by the London Symphony Orchestra over a period of 12 days in March 1977, also being released as a double LP soundtrack by 20th Century Fox Records and cementing its place as one of the greatest movie soundtracks ever made. Fun fact, when Star Wars was submitted to the Motion Picture Association of America's rating board, they originally wanted to give the movie a G rating, but Fox requested the stricter PG rating, partially because they believed the film was just a little too scary for younger children, and also, and possibly more importantly, Fox feared that teenagers would perceive a G rating as simply being uncool. Star Wars was released on May 25th, 1977 in very few theaters. Barely a handful, to be honest, like 32 theaters, I think, but just 2 weeks later, the film premiered at Mann's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles, where lines literally went around the block, with thousands of people attending a ceremony in which C-3PO, R2-D2, and Darth Vader placed their footprints in the theater's courtyard, and at this point, Star Wars was playing in over 1,000 theaters in the United States, with 60 of them playing the film continuously for over an entire year straight. Star Wars immediately broke every box office record in the books. Only 3 weeks after it opened, 20th Century Fox's stock price doubled to a record high, the highest prior being $37 million in any given year. But in 1977, it posted a profit of $79 million. That, my friends, was Star Wars. George Lucas became instantly wealthy, also having been smart enough to buy back the licensing rights so he could start producing those wonderful Star Wars toys, and Star Wars earned over $2.5 million in its first 6 days, replacing Jaws as the highest earning film in North America and eventually grossing over $220 million during its initial theatrical run, which would be a staggering $1.14 billion today. And the rest, as they say, is Star Wars history, my friends, winning 6 Academy Awards, 2 BAFTA Awards, 1 Golden Globe Award, 3 Grammy Awards, 13 Saturn Awards, along with special recognition by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to Ben Burt, John Dykstra, and the rest of the ILM team.
Okay, but what about all the reboots, remakes, and God help us reimaginings?
Well, there were 2, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
There were a lot more than that.
No, there weren't.
There was the Star Wars Holiday Special.
No, there wasn't.
There were the special editions.
No, there weren't.
I see where this is going.
The legacy of this film is timeless, and yes, there have been lots of other Star Wars things over the years, TV specials, special editions, prequels, sequels, and that's all great, and I'm sure every one of those has their own audience that enjoys them just as much as I enjoy the original Star Wars trilogy. And you know, personally, I think that maybe, just maybe, mind you, especially these days, there's a bit of an oversaturation going on with Star Wars content. I would personally like to see less Star Wars less often, but really high quality movies or TV shows being produced rather than simply throwing out as much content out there as possible to get the Disney Plus subscriptions up to recoup their $4 billion investment. I get it, I suppose. I never really thought I would say this about Star Wars, but to me, you can sometimes have too much of a very good thing. But again, that's just my opinion.
McClunky.
Don't even start, but not all is lost, my friends. Without going into any specific details, you can, if you want, with very little effort, find the original unaltered 1977 theatrical version of Star Wars out there in glorious 4K. Can't really say too much about it other than that, but it's out there. Take a look. You'll find it.
And may the Schwartz be with you.
And have you guys ever wanted to own your very own piece of Star Wars history? Well, with my friends over at Reliquary, you can. Displays, props, large displays, and collectibles, including a ton of really cool, authentic pieces of Star Wars history. I've got a bunch of these in my collection myself. They're super cool. I absolutely love them, so definitely check these guys out. Link in the description. I really hope you guys enjoyed that extremely long, super deep dive into the original 1977 Star Wars, and if you did and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole bunch of new stuff coming up really soon that I know you guys are just gonna dig.
And if you'd like to help support the channel, you can always buy us a coffee. Link in the description.
And please feel free to stop back anytime as we together continue the conversation on movies, music, and monsters.
Movies, music, and monsters.